As the countdown to 2030 accelerates, the pressure mounts for mobile networks operators not only to reduce their own emissions, but to redefine their role in the fight against climate change. With just 5 years left to reach key sustainability targets, are operators moving fast enough? We're going to talk about this in this session. And what bold steps are required to halve their emissions by 2030 and make a real impact? My name is Katarina Rolfsdotter Jansson, and I'll be talking to you today in this session as organized by GSMA, the Mobile Industry Association. Well, first, we'll have a fantastic panel that will take us through our questions. But first, before the panel, let's shed some light on the situation. And I'd like to give the scene to Stephen Moore, your head of climate action at GSMA. So please, you have a keynote prepared for us, so you have our full attention, Stephen.
Thank you very much, Katarina. It's great to be with you here today. So give an overview of climate action in the mobile sector, maybe just going back to 2019, when the board of the GSMA, that's the Mobile Industry Association, sets an ambition for the whole of the industry to be net zero by 2050. And this ambition was actually ahead of any G7 country. Fast forward to where we are this year, and we actually see 80% of the industry by global mobile connections are publicly reporting their carbon emissions each year. So there's been fantastic progress on transparency. We have also seen really good progress on mobile network operators aligning their targets to 1.5 degrees. So we actually now have 70 operators all around the world that have committed to these targets and are working to achieve them. How are they doing actually though on progress? So this is something that at the GSMA we measure every year. We produce an annual mobile net zero report, and our last report showed that the emissions of networks seem to be starting to plateau, which is really good news. So what we see is for mobile networks there has been a slight increase, but this has been offset by a decrease in fixed networks, which is broadband. How this has been achieved is through a combination of energy efficiency measures, but also switching to renewable energy as well. Renewable energy can be invested and purchased over markets, and we've seen really fantastic progress on this in Europe in particular. In other countries around the world, though, it is a little bit more tricky, and this is something that we're actually calling on as the mobile industry, calling on governments to speed up the deployment of renewables, but also help create a market that enables companies to purchase renewables. We have a huge amount of demand for renewable electricity from our sector to green telco networks. We're also seeing the deployment of more on-site renewables as well, which is fantastic because this is directly displacing diesel generators, which is sometimes used to power mobile masts in remote locations. So we're seeing more things like on-site solar combined with batteries that are able to be used instead of diesel. We have seen some challenges though, particularly for supply chain emissions. So this is actually the majority of emissions from our sector. It's about 3/4 of the total emissions. And that's formed of all the things that effectively we purchase as a sector, so covers network equipment that we use both for mobile data center and telephone exchanges. It also covers devices, mobile devices, and it also covers what we call customer premises equipment. So this is things like broadband routers that sits in people's homes. And this is very tricky to decarbonize. We need to use lots of different levers in order to reduce emissions there. Things like switching to renewables in the supply chain, but also more from the energy efficiency as well in manufacturing facilities. Also thinking about the materials we use to make these products. So moving away from kind of virgin raw materials, using more recycled content. And above all, using equipment for longer, because for a lot of this equipment, most of the emissions from the equipment actually sits in it being manufactured. So if we can use it for as long as possible, then the overall life cycle emissions of that equipment will definitely be lower. I think we can perhaps dive into some of these challenges in the panel discussion, but hopefully that gives a good overview of where we are today.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Stephen Moore. Now, next guest, Dr. Huyumien Lee. You are Head of Group Environmental Sustainability at Singtel. It's a presentation for us, so take it away, please.
Thank you, Katarina. First of all, good day everyone who's online, and I would like to express my appreciation to the organizer for having me here. So, Singtel Group is a telecom operator in Singapore. In 2023, we've revalidated our net zero target, and in the process, we've also brought forward our net zero from 2050 to 2045. So today, after having our goal set, I think what I'm going to share with you is really about from pledges to action, a few key highlights that are what we are doing in order to move towards our net zero goal. So after the goal was set, what we did was we follow up with a group environmental strategy, which we call the 4D environmental sustainability strategy. They are underpinned by 4 pillars. The first one, defend our asset in order to create a more resilient network, decarbonize our operation towards a net zero network, as well as dematerialize our business operation so that we are moving towards a more circular business. We believe that with this 3 pillar well done, we are in a very good position to deliver sustainable value to our stakeholders. One of the things that we have taken care of during the development of this framework really is to make sure that we have built in 3 enablers, one relating to people, engage and equip, one relating to finance for sustainability, and the last one on corporate governance when it comes to policies and guidelines. So, yeah. Next. Yes. And then, so you can see that, 3 enablers, these are the few initiatives that we have put across the 3 enablers. And let me bring you more into details. And we do this because we believe that sustainability or towards a net zero goal, it's everybody responsibility, from all the way from our senior management even to our sales associate in the store. So the first one, equip and engage, that's essentially relating to people. So what we have done is we have done 2 big initiatives. The first one is really to equip and to empower our staff with relevant sustainability knowledge. So we divide it into 3 different levels: the basic, intermediate, and advanced. What we've done is really to roll out a basic e-training module to everyone in the organization, because we believe if you don't know anything about sustainability, when you join Singtel, we would equip you with the necessary knowledge to know what the Singtel sustainability stand. And then so the second big pillar that we've done is really we created a network of advocates and champions whom we call the Singtel Champ for the environment. So they are meant to look at ground up activities, to look at how do we create a more sustainable workplace from the way we live, from the and the way we work in our workplace. The second one, obviously, is finance for sustainability. We have sustainable linked loan framework since 2021, and in the last 2 years, we've worked to also bring about internal carbon pricing into our big capex investment as well as our large OPEX spend. Finally, I think this is also one of the key ones, because if we want our organization to transform into a more sustainable organization, definitely we need to make sure the way we do business, the way we run about our operation has to have the right policies and guidelines that enable everybody to move into the same direction towards the net zero goal. So in the last 2 years, we've been working a lot to refresh our environmental policy, to be more specific about climate and emissions clause, as well as we just published our climate statement that talks about that affirmation of our commitment to climate action. And finally, we've also just launched a responsible procurement policy that look at not just us, but also our greater value chain to be able to decarbonize together. And then I come to my last point, which is also a very important one. It's since a few years back, we have actually tied our top executive remuneration to sustainability. So part of their remuneration in terms of their long-term incentive does gets tied to how we perform from a climate perspective. And I think this one, it's one of the, I would say, good motivation that we have seen people working alongside with us. So I think with that, I will stop here as we're going to delve more into this later at the panel. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed. And as a former customer of Singtel, I used to live in Singapore. I'm very impressed by this work.
Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you. And now let's continue with a panel discussion on this important topic. And I'm now joined by Mats Pelbeck-Sharp, who is chairperson of, we don't have time, with a long track record and long history in the telco business. And Stephen Tallier is back here, Stephen Moore. And also we are joined by Mehwish Ramzan. You are ESG manager at Jazz, and that is based here in Baku, right? In Pakistan. Oh, sorry, then my information in my script was not correct. You're in Pakistan. I beg your pardon. So Stephen, what main challenges would you say the telcos are facing in aligning business strategies with climate goals? We talked about this in the previous session. And how are these challenges being overcome from your perspective, please?
Yeah, I think I touched upon a couple of them just in the opening. So I think one big challenge is around access to renewable energy. It's really going to help get us to the 2030 targets that we've got across the industry. So it's a really big focus, and we know that it's not just our industry that is asking for renewables, but all industries are. But we have so many willing buyers of renewables, and the frustration is that the energy markets in many countries at the moment don't allow for corporate purchase of renewables. So we really need to see a liberalization of those markets, and we've seen it start to happen. So South Africa is quite a good recent example. We've seen one of our members, Vodacom in South Africa, has been working very closely with both the government and the National Energy Company to help create a route for corporate purchase of renewable energy and investment into new renewables. And South Africa has some troubles with its energy grid. So having new renewables coming onto that market will be both helpful for companies to decarbonize and reach their targets, but also helpful for the country in general to be able to stabilize its energy grid. So I'd say that's one area. And then I also touched upon the supply chain is also very tricky because it's such a big and diverse set of companies. And we've seen mobile network operators working much more closely with the tier 1 suppliers in particular, but also down to tier 2 and further up into the supply chain to try and figure out how they can innovate products to reduce these embodied emissions that are trapped in them, and therefore how we can decarbonize these supply chains as well. So I'd say there are two areas that we've started to try and tackle, but there's still quite a lot more that needs to happen.
Well, thank you very much. I have a question to Mehwish Ramzan and also Dr. Hui. I'd like to start with you, Mehwish. What are the key internal mechanisms that really, in your organization, needs to be implemented and also embedded in the climate strategies to really move along here?
Yeah, so I'll share the net zero journey that Jazz did. We took this pledge in 2022 that we are going to become net zero by 2050, and since then we are working on a number of initiatives To begin with, we are following the GSMA ESG metrics. It has 3 pillars for environment, which is emission, energy, and waste reduction. So this is a kind of a metrics that we are following. For energy, for example, we are going for conservation practices and energy efficiency. And of course, Stephen mentioned that renewable energy is a big challenge for developing market like Pakistan. So that's not the number 1 choice, but we are considering other options as well. And for emissions, we are reducing our emissions by going for offsetting programs. For example, by plantation drives, by reducing the SIM card size, which ultimately leads to less pollution, and waste reduction. Circular economy is the big thing that we are incorporating in our business strategy, that by circulating the e-waste in our business operations, we can reduce our footprint.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Ramzan. And Dr. Hui, from your, I mean, you shared your presentation already, but would you like to add anything on this topic, on the question that I just posed?
Sure, thank you. I think one of the things that I have not included in the presentation really it's about also governance in terms of how we structure our organization. So since few months back, what we have done is last year we set up a board sustainability committee to really oversee sustainability at the highest level. And then from it cascade down to the management. So in the last few months, what we have also done is really to establish a sustainability governance structure within each individual operating companies that we have in Singapore and Australia. And that's the whole idea of distributing accountability or cascading accountability into the different OpCo, their management, and subsequently into our top executive as well as the middle management. So I think that's one of the things that we're working very hard on in order to get this collective action that's being done across all our business.
Thank you very much. So turning now to you, Mats, what innovative business models have you seen that are really enhancing the sustainability in the telco section? I mean, you've worked in this sector for many years.
Sure, thank you. I think some are on the energy side. We have seen the need now with more and more renewable energy into the grid. There is a need to balance the grid, and several operators are in fact using the base stations as sort of, and the batteries that are there for backup as grid balancing and sort of offering services to the grids with energy balancing in different ways, and that is, I think, I mean, there are a lot of base stations where we have a lot of people, so then it's a relatively good match with where we need the power for the grid. Also, I mean, taking it one step further, as Stephen was talking about companies now investing in both power purchase agreements, but also direct investing in building, especially in countries with poor grid or poor energy supply, build energy plants and then offering that back to the grid. So the operator also becomes, in a way, energy providers to the countries, and by investing in direct investment in solar and wind farms. And then I think also on the circularity side, so if the energy is one thing, then on the circularity, quite a lot of operators now offer mobile phones or handsets as in leasing models, especially to companies. And I mean, if the mobile operator have a lot of their emissions in sort of, if they don't have renewable energy, a lot of the emissions come from the energy consumption of the networks. But when they have taken care of that, then it's more about the other things. And for handsets, 90% of the emissions comes from the production. So producing the handset itself, the processors and the display and the camera, which are the main parts that use a lot of energy. And if you could prolong the life, you can reduce the sort of lifetime emissions from a handset. So I think a leasing model is very, very good for the whole industry to reduce the total carbon footprint.
Well, thank you very much, Mats Feldbeck-Sharp. Turning now back to you, Mirish, in terms of tangible, not only environmental, but also social benefits, and also, of course, the financial side on it has to be included here. What do you see from embedding climate strategies into your business models?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I would like to add, and I will emphasize the longevity of devices and network equipment. That is one thing, that by doing so, we can reduce those emissions for the long term. And also regarding the circularity of devices, it has a number of advantages. In fact, we are in the initial planning stage of introducing kind of a tech bin for Jazz, in which customers can drop off their unused handsets. Like there are over 5 billion handsets which are sitting in the drawers and they are not used by anyone. So we need to take those handsets out and recycle, or maybe first of all, like we have to fix them, refurbish them, and then reuse. And the last option is recycling that. So this is kind of it has an additional benefit in a way that it has a component of digital and financial inclusion as well. So by giving the repaired handsets to the people who have affordability issues in the developing market, you are enabling them to connect digitally. So that is kind of a tangible solution that you can incorporate in your climate strategy, especially being a developing market.
Thank you very much. Also, the urban mining perspective that you really have.
Yes,
You have a mine in your drawer. For many people, that's where you keep
Yes.
your old phones, right?
Yes.
So, Dr. Hui, your perspective on the embedding of climate strategies into the business models and the benefits, please.
Yeah, I think so. If I bring back to what I have talked about, essentially, if you look at the three enablers, they are not a sustainability enabler per se. So it is actually about people. When we talk about learning and development, it is about us engaging the learning and development team to say that, look, we need to do this learning and development. So there's this collaborative effort, and I think through that allows us to again upskill our fellow colleagues in that space, in that relevant area, and we're not like giving them anything under the sun, but we're really taking out that very specific climate related aspect to embed into their work. So I think that has helped in terms of really incorporating it as part of business as usual, and also people taking accountability for it. I often tell people, when we come and collaborate with you, it's not about giving you more work. I'm only asking you to convert 20% of your work into climate related. I'm not giving you 20% more work. So I think really that benefit, it's efficiency, as well as I think from an effectiveness perspective, it is only when the whole company in their respective function can level up in their respective area when it comes to climate related, then we'll be successful, because my department in group sustainability can never be an expert in all areas: HR, finance, corporate governance. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
So is there any specific hurdle that is bigger than any other hurdle that you would like to shed some light on?
Yeah, sure. So we often say that the sustainability professionals, when we go out and meet together, including the GSMA, we could bond and we could relate to each other very well, because every one of us faces similar challenges in terms of trying to do transformation work, right, or change. I think what really in the past, the challenges really comes from a mindset issue, allowing people to understand what is it about. People might think that, again, it's your work, don't come and look for me. But I think we have moved on from there. So really the challenges at this point in time, it's about how do we work collectively with every one of them in a way that balances that transition. Because I think just transition in terms of moving towards net zero is equally important. For example, when the other panelists talk about renewable energy, we are renewable energy disadvantaged in Singapore as well. So there is a certain limit to how much or how fast we can push until the greater environment it's conducive for us to move. So really balancing that act between when to do what in a way that would be most effective to the company from a business point, and from a climate point, it's what the challenge is right now.
Thank you very much. And Mirish, would you like to add anything from your perspective?
Yeah, definitely. I would say that customer behavior is another factor that determines the incorporation of climate strategy into your business strategy, because people are unfortunately more interested in the packages and the data and the continuity of the connections. So you know that switching to a clean energy and clean operations, it requires cost. So we need to make our customers aware that this is why we are doing it as a long-term benefit for everyone, as a nation, as a company as well, at a global scale also. So I think this factor needs to be incorporated. Yeah.
Thank you. So Stephen, bringing the industry perspective from the GSMA, what success stories can you share that is really, that you can highlight in this transition?
So I think we're seeing a lot of change happening across the sector, a lot of positive change. I think a lot of it is perhaps happening behind the scenes and isn't necessarily public. So one of the success stories I would like to highlight is the level of cooperation that is going on between companies at the moment. So this isn't something that necessarily is talked about enormously much publicly, but we've seen this because when we made this net zero ambition back in 2019, we set up something called a climate action task force. And this was really a way in which we could bring together the industry, particularly those network operators, to work collaboratively on different climate issues, because we knew there were quite a lot of things that we would need to solve together. And we didn't even know all of the problems back in 2019. Obviously, each year we kind of uncover the next thing that we need to work on. And we started with, I think, between 20 and 30 operators back in 2019. Just this year, we've hit 75, and that now covers 80% of mobile connections around the world. So
80%.
80%.
Impressive.
So, I think we've really hit a significant majority of the industry that is willing to work together to solve these issues. And some of these issues can only be solved collectively. So some of them involve action that needs to be taken within countries. So it might be direct engagement with the government to talk about the renewable energy challenges we've discussed before. But some of these other challenges, for example, around the supply chain, really is an engagement with a common set of suppliers. And we don't have a huge number of suppliers in our supply chain. So we have maybe less than 10 key suppliers for network equipment. We have maybe about 10 key suppliers that actually sell mobile handsets, mobile devices around the world. Some of them very, very big names like Apple and Samsung. We know some of those are actually making really big environmental commitments and progress. So we've seen Apple commit to, I think, having a carbon neutral supply chain by 2030. They've invested a lot into renewables in their supply chain. We've also seen them talk about increasing recycled content in their supply chain and their devices. So I think they're up to maybe about 30% recycled content. So this is fantastic. We can see companies actually put into action some of these challenges we talk around circularity. And I'd say that is, having those leaders is really helpful, because other companies then can't turn around and say it's not possible, because you can point to them and say it is possible. This company's already doing it. There are some challenges in individual markets, but generally, if it's been achieved in a market somewhere, it can be achieved in other markets as well. I'll also, this is not something that we usually do as an industry association, but I will give a positive shout out for regulation, and that is the regulation that the European Union has put in place to encourage more sustainability and circular economy in Europe.
So the design directive.
The Eco-Design Directive, exactly that. And that's really helping drive forward progress in this area. Things like the right to repair for devices, because we talk about, and we've talked about on this panel, we really need to have it, as Max was saying, the majority of the emissions of devices sit in its manufacture, so we need to have them in use as long as possible. So there are some, there are some challenges there around maintaining kind of profitability, and if you're relying on selling significant number of devices each year, so there's a little bit of tension between those two things. But if we can also bring those devices back and that material back in, then we can have this circular economy. We can continue to sell significant numbers of devices each year, but as long as they are sustainable, they're coming back in and we're using them to make new devices.
Thank you, Stephen. So Mats, what success stories or story would you like to share from your perspective?
Well, I think I'll go back then to my sort of life at Ericsson, and I think, in fact, what Stephen was talking about, sort of the partnership across the supply chain, I think has been very, very important. And I mean, yes, for devices and for network equipment, there is already now quite few suppliers and quite good progress. But then at Ericsson, I knew that we had 24,000 suppliers. So it's a big
24,000.
24,000. And then, of course, a few of them stands for a very large part of the carbon footprint in the supply chain. I mean, maybe 200 is 80-90% of the total emissions. But you have to manage the rest. And then I would say that sort of the work that we started together with sort of the supply chain initiative with Exponential Roadmap, where we said we put hard requirements on our suppliers, but we also help them meet those requirements, learning from sort of the history. So really giving them advice, tools to help them with reporting, to help them to start their strategy. There's a lot of sort of things that are, if you're a small supplier, hard to get to grasp and get started with. And I think those tools, I really can encourage all companies to use the same tools, because then it becomes even stronger. If we and our competitors and also I mean all mobile operators have the same requirements, working in the with the same tools and direct towards them, then it's easier for supply to meet that. Then they know how to meet that. And I think that has been very successful in the way that it has been driven. It was very sort of early on to work in that way, and I think that is a really good story, I think.
It is a good story indeed. What success story would you like to share, or do you recognize the Ericsson story?
Yes, definitely. In fact, together with Ericsson, who is our network supplier, we do have a take-back program. Not only just the phone, we actually have a take-back program together with Ericsson. So all our Ericsson equipment goes back to Ericsson. And for last year, I think we've taken back about 190 tons. We sent back 190 tons.
190 tons.
Yes, back to Ericsson for responsible end of life management. And that's primarily because we were on a 5G rollout. So we actually had to change quite a fair bit of equipment. And I really think this kind of collaboration should not just be with one provider, but the rest of our supplier as well. So when you are able to, bring it back, when we talk about forward logistics, we move it to the customer, taking it back from customer. I think we need to enable that reverse logistic back to manufacturing, so that the material get reused back into new product, right? So to improve their circularity. So that's really I thought it's initiative that I wanted to share more. For us, I think from a mobile association, I think Stephen has been very humble. I felt like I'm new to the industry, like 3 years, but since I joined, I think GSMA has really done a good job in terms of bringing all the mobile operators across the world together. We kept the momentum going for 3 years, and then at that level, we are talking a lot about industry development. We're talking a lot about the things that's needed to effect a bigger change when the industry system is ready. Then when it cascades down to individual operator within our individual jurisdiction, it gets a lot easier when you have a bigger environment.
Of course.
So I would say that to me, it's been one of the success when it comes to the global movement of moving towards a net zero goal.
Thank you. And this is, of course, the collaboration element here, something you can build on more and more. So, Mirish, any success story or stories that you would like to share?
So I have 2 success stories in past 2 years. I want to highlight what Jazz has achieved so far. So in past 2 years, we have planted over 36,000 trees, which is a part of a nature-based solution to carbon offset. So that is one success story, because they are quite popular in Pakistan. In addition to that, we have also reduced the SIM card jacket size. And by doing so, we are avoiding around 3,800 tons of CO2 emissions per year. So that's a huge success in past 2 years. These are the 2 achievements.
Just from the SIM card size?
Yes.
Wow.
Just because the rest of the card is all plastic waste. And this
true.
is a very small portion that is usable. So by just halving the SIM card size, we are approximately offsetting or avoiding 3,800 tons of CO2 emissions into the atmosphere. So that's a great achievement. Yeah.
The devil is indeed in the details, huh? I'd say.
Yeah.
So before we finish this panel, I'd like to ask you your experience so far at the COP and what you're hoping for. Let's start with you, Dr. Yu.
This is my first COP, and in fact, this is my first panel. I just registered. I feel good, and I think it's important for us to continue this conversation despite some challenges or controversy. And definitely my wish for this year's COP really is to live up to the theme of COP29, in solidarity with the green world, that everybody would let your voice heard and really take action towards a net zero goal, so that we all have a better future in keeping, better hope of keeping the 1.5, the Paris Agreement alive.
It's
Thank
really
you.
on the CPR right now, but let's really push to keep it alive for sure. So Mats,
Well, I think that I was in a presentation this morning with Al Gore on something called Climate Tracer, where they use AI and satellite sensors together with science to trace emissions globally, both carbon emissions but also particles. And that was, I mean, Al Gore is always sort of a very interesting person to listen to, and he has a lot of sort of good information about sort of how much we subsidize oils and so on, so which is pretty depressing. But I think that was super interesting, and that tool demonstrates how digitalization and digital technologies really can make a difference, because suddenly all the cities know where they have the emissions, and they can sort of they trace sort of what's called black ships, which is sort of the ships that turn off their tracking device that is there for safety, but they turn it off because they do illegal fishing, or they go to ports that are not allowed, or so on, and they can then track also the emissions from those and see where they are. So a fantastic tool, I think. And then I think also in this COP it is like the feeling is mixed in a way. We have sort of some, I mean, the usual resistance from the oil lobby and from others, and from companies, countries that are dependent on oil in different forms, trying to stop things. But then I think when you get into the industry and business zones, you see everything that is happening, and sort of independent of elections and global crisis, there is still a drive within industry and within sort of the finance sector to make a difference and realize that, I mean, it's costly to mitigate climate, but talk about the cost of not doing it. The cost of inaction is huge, and I think that was also part of what Al Gore talked about. So I think if we have a high cost to take away the carbon and change, transition and electrify industry and transports, the cost of not doing it. I mean, look on all the things that are happening right now around us, and how that is sort of escalating very, very fast. I think that gives, I mean, if you can take it from a positive side, that really makes it important to drive the things like I mean, I must say GSMA have done a fantastic job. I mean, covering so many of a whole industry. The telecom industry is clearly leading the way, and I think that is fantastic.
thank you, Mats. That's a nice handover to you, Stephen.
Yeah, thanks, Mats. So yeah, I think I'd say two things actually coming into this conference. I think one is the disconnect that we're starting to see between business ambition and ambition from governments. So it used to be the other way around, that governments were leading and businesses were seen to be holding back, and it's really switched in recent years. And I think, you know, looking forward into what's going to happen in COPs from next year onwards, with the challenge that we might have around where the United States might be in this process, and if they do end up withdrawing, how are we going to maintain momentum? So, and I think by tapping into businesses and the level of ambition and the willingness to collaborate that businesses have, we can use this to perhaps step in and fill perhaps a vacuum that might be created if we do lose such a key player and part of the COP process. And there is a fantastic group called the Climate Champions that are already creating this bridge between the COP process and non-state actors, particularly businesses. So I would love to see Climate Champions kind of supercharged and brought much more into the fore to help really harness the ambition that businesses have to move things forward. So that would be the first thing. The second thing I would say is this year's COP, we have the first digitalization day. I can't actually say it.
It's very difficult.
It's a long word.
You're native speaking, but it's still difficult, yes.
So digitalization day, which is happening tomorrow, and fantastic promise. Actually, we hear a lot of negativity around how much energy data centers are using and how this is this is not good for the environment. Actually, we see a lot of ICT companies and telcos as well switching to renewables and really leaning into energy efficiency, and it's still a very, very small proportion of overall electricity use and carbon emissions around the world. I think we need to also consider how green digital action, so how we can leverage these digital technologies to actually support reducing emissions. There are lots of use cases for this from across the whole economy. Matt's touched upon one before around kind of smart energy technologies, so where we're using connectivity to better match supply and demand across energy systems. That's what we'll need to do, increasingly doing, because we've got more intermittent renewable energy coming onto grids. We need to balance that. That will only be done through connectivity and through smart connectivity. We know there's fantastic applications in smart agriculture. We know that manufacturing 4.0 is already heading in that direction. Lots of efficiencies there. And we haven't even touched upon AI, which is usually the topic of every conversation at the moment. But I think once we bring that into the mix to get AI thinking about green digital action, then we're really going to be able to accelerate that. So there would be my two takeaways. It's kind of get businesses involved a bit more, progressive businesses, I should say, not the oil and gas lobby. Outside. Leave them behind, please. Yes. and then lean to.
Thank you very much indeed, Stephen. Mirish, your take on this.
So I would just like to sum this thing up that the purpose of COP is to raise the ambition in terms of NDCs, right? Every government is proposing their NDCs and they are raising their ambition day by day. Every year they are portraying some new thing. But I think my key takeaway, or the thing that I really just take out of this conference, is to start taking action. That is much needed. Start from somewhere. Being a telco, we are doing our part, and we encourage other industries also to take their role, because we are the least contributor in terms of GHG emissions, but GSMA made it possible for us to connect and just take action on that. So why not every other organization or other industry can have a collaborative effort around this subject? So that's my thing.
Thank you for ending on in such a positive way. I mean, it is complex, and you're sharing your success stories and also bringing up such great numbers. It's truly inspiring and impressive. So keep trailblazing, and good luck with the digitalization day. I actually said it. What would you know?
Said it perfectly.
And the AI that might solve some of our challenges here. But best of luck, all four of you, with your important work. And thank you for sharing your insights.
Thank you very
so
much.
much.
Thank you so much.